all his friends pretty much are straight, and he's living with his friends from home, and he's kind of squashed that part of himself to be applicable to them and to his image of being straight, gay in a straight world. And so he's not really taking care of his sexual health. Perhaps his boyfriend is cheating on him, but he doesn't really want to believe that either until he's forced by what the sexual health worker refers to as boggy balls.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm really excited because this is another LGBTQ plus novel discussion. I am so excited to introduce Henry Fry, who I first just love the phallic imagery in the cover that I have for First Time for Everything. So I'll have to dig into this version. But just a little about Henry. He's an award-winning writer, designer, and climate and LGBT rights activist living in London. In 2016, he was long-listed for the PRH Right Now scheme, and in 2017 won the Literary Consultancy's Free Reads Award for new LGBT plus voices. And in 2019, he was the recipient of the London Writers Award program. There you go. And First Time for Everything, which we're here to discuss, is his first novel. So I'm so excited to be joined by you, Henry. I've been so eager to get into your novel, and I always wait until the week before my interviews to really dig into the work that I'm discussing, because if not, it just falls out of my head, which, no offense to past interviews. I remember all of their novels in those moments, but then, it's stored somewhere else in my memory. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, so I think I have is this the American or the UK
It's
edition?
the UK version you've got, and I think
Okay.
that's also the same as the Canadian version.
Okay, yes, and I
Um,
think I got the privilege of having the UK version because of an early copy. So
yes, yeah,
the
yeah.
inside of the interviewing business. But I do, because I know your other cover has like a male face. It's like your
Mm,
character's, your character's face, Danny, and
yes.
it's almost surrounded by psychedelic colors. Yeah.
Psychedelic rainbow, like pouring from his mind. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's very
like
different.
yeah, so why do you think these covers are so different? Like, did you have a say in that, or was this a marketing decision?
It's a whole bunch of reasons. So my publisher in the UK is Orion, and my publisher in America is Penguin Random House. And I worked with both sets of editors to come up with a cover image that we thought summed up the book, but also placed it in the market in the way that we thought was gonna appeal to the people that we wanted it to appeal to. So in America, it's much more like very clearly this is a queer book because we were sort of um following after things like, oh my gosh, so many different kinds of books like Tales of the City, and it was very much like in the queer tradition because we felt
Mhm.
like there was a bigger market for that, whereas in the UK we wanted it to be a queer story that was kind of marketed for everybody. So as you can see on your copy, there is a very phallic cactus right in the middle, so
Yeah.
it's hinting at it being a bit of a cheeky queer story, but it's also, we want it to be kind of approachable for queer people and non-queer people because the book cover is like the biggest marketing part of the book.
Yeah, I mean, they always say don't judge a book by its cover, but it's something that everyone is encountering right away.
Yeah, I mean, a
So,
lot of work goes into the cover, so
yes.
I think in some ways you should, in some ways you
Yeah.
shouldn't, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think if it's so splashy, of course, your eyes aesthetically, you're going to be drawn to, even after First Time, like, why is the cactus sprouting up phallically? It has
Yeah.
this very uh what do they call it? Like a gay for play type of uh porn kind of, it's their first time, like this whole scripted scenario.
Yeah, there is a not very subtle innuendo in the cover for sure.
Yeah. So I think right away, just for everyone out there, First Time for Everything, it's such a unique novel that I've read and listened to. I love the audiobook version too. I'm known to try to do both. Like I like
Mm.
to listen on my working when I'm doing other projects. I'll have it on in the back. Um and I even played it before this interview, like just to get into your
Mm.
character's psyches again. Um and I think what I'm so drawn to is why um why start at such an interesting moment in Danny's life, which is something that could be so mundane, which is a sexual health screening, like something you wouldn't think would be dramatized, but it
Mm.
has us get into his interior mind and like questioning what's happening with this health screening, what's happening with
Yeah.
maybe having an STI, did his boyfriend cheat on him, right? It's everything coming on at once. So like where did that idea for you come from?
So it was interesting. Originally, that scene appeared much later in the novel, and it was only through kind of workshopping it with my writers group that I was with at the time that it I decided to put it earlier in the novel. And the reason for that was, so the novel follows Danny Scudd, who is a 27-year-old cis gay man who lives in London, who also narrates the novel and transforms throughout his wild kind of queer journey. But he starts off being very buttoned up. And this is actually the first time he's ever been to a sexual health clinic, because he's very much like, he came out when he was at university, but he's never really inhabited that queer identity fully. So he's kind of, all his friends pretty much are straight, and he's living with his friends from home, and he's kind of squashed that part of himself to be applicable to them and to his image of being straight, gay in a straight world. And so he's not really taking care of his sexual health. Perhaps his boyfriend is cheating on him, but he doesn't really want to believe that either until he's forced by what the sexual health worker refers to as boggy balls, to go to the clinic, a place he's really avoiding, and it forces him. It's like the catalyst moment that forces him to start looking at the reality of his life rather than how he would like it, in a very avoidant way, how he would like it to be.
Yeah. Is boggy balls a British slang phrase, or is this something I've never heard boggy balls before? Is this something you
No.
came up with?
So, okay, so some of the experiences in the book are drawn from life. And
Yeah,
unfortunately,
get that.
this
Go there
one
with
is
us.
drawn from my own life. I had a boggy ball. This is not a general term. This was something that the nurse said to me, and it really stuck in my head. I thought, wow, that is a way to describe what turned out to be a UTI.
Oh
Um,
wow.
but
Wait,
she
so
was
what
so,
does boggy mean?
oh, so boggy is like a bog, like a marsh. So it
Oh.
it means, it is a strange word to describe a testicle in any shape or form. But it just really stuck with me because it's like quite grotesque, but also
So it's
quite
kind of like
hilarious.
a ball full of bacteria. Is that
Yeah, or like
what?
a ball full of mud or something,
Oh
it's
God.
quite gross.
But it is really uh captivating as an image, the
Yeah,
visceralness of that. Like you can, even without knowing what boggy ball means, you just know that it is
not good.
something grotesque. Yeah, like you said. Um well, I'm glad that your boggy ball has been healed, hopefully, Henry.
Oh my gosh, that
Um
was a long time ago. Don't worry.
uh, well, so another aspect of what I just am really what I've loved, what I'm still pondering over in your novel is those straight dynamics with his
Mm,
Danny has these two roommates, they're a couple, like they're about to get married. Um and it reminds me of Bridesmaids. I don't know if you've seen Bridesmaids, right? But
yeah, a long
there's
time
like
ago.
the Kristen
Yeah.
Wiig character living with the Rebel Wilson uh she's playing this roommate pairing who kicks Kristen Wiig out of the house, and it like gave me those flashbacks. But I thought in this gay male context, it was really interesting how much you're commenting on. I think there's a line where Danny questions if he was just an accessory to
Yeah.
his straight friends. So yeah, like, is this also coming from your own experience, or just like how you've seen straight and gay friendships and those dynamics at play?
That's kind of come from a whole, I suppose, series of things, which I don't know. I suppose I've experienced it in some ways when I was a lot younger. Certainly not in the ways that Danny experiences it exactly, but I feel like it's quite a common. I feel like maybe not so much now, but especially not
Mhm.
with like the Gen Zers. I feel like they're much more aware.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm 35. So I remember being a teenager and people saying like, "Oh, you don't seem gay." And I was like, "Oh, yes." Like
Oh yeah, like no, that meant you're right. Let's unpack that if that's okay. Now
yeah, yeah.
you've entered Andrew's psychoanalytic
Yeah.
office. But I'm a millennial. I just turned 30 and I came out when I was 15, so it's been half of my life. And I remember in high
Yeah.
school, I look back and like this, and this was probably my own insecurity after having just come out, but are they going to know I'm gay? Does my voice reveal
Mm.
something? Like, right? I feel that
Yes, the voice. Yeah.
yes, I feel that like the 2000 to 2000 like tens were full of such um these markers of like, where you going to be found out? And then now I'm just like, I feel so excited about who I am and my identity. Like, oh great, if they think I'm gay, maybe there'll be someone they can set me up with. I don't know. Like, I do. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
that, you're right, is this Gen Z openness, especially with TikTok. And like, this is where social media, I think, has really amplified LGBTQ voices. Or even, I don't know if you've been seeing all this is going to go into a rabbit hole, but just because I'm really into gym culture, like just these like straight men who are showing off their asses, and like there's all these TikTok videos of them like wearing these revealing clothes, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
wow, this is definitely not my experience when I was in high school.
No,
Like,
right, exactly.
but I know in the UK there's kind of more of, I guess, what we would call like heteroflexibility with men, or studies had shown that. But I think now America's, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I mean, I guess you could weigh in
Oh
from
my God,
your
that's very
perspective.
interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, um, gosh, I mean, I don't know really. I mean, certainly when I was younger, it was fine. It was much more acceptable for women to be kind of like socially bisexual because it was mostly for the lens of the guys, but not so much for guys to experiment. And I definitely think that stigma has dropped down a little bit. I think there's still a lot of stigma and there's still a lot of pressure on men to be men, but in a kind of different way, like talking about like the gym culture, like there's I don't know if it's an equivalent pressure to the way that women feel about their bodies, but I feel like there is an increasing pressure on men to look perfect in a certain way as well, which I feel like
Mhm.
wasn't the same as when I was younger. It was definitely like
No.
more pressured towards women.
Yeah, and
Um,
I feel like fashion for men, definitely. I know when I came out, like certain fashion markers, again, there was like almost this microscopic detective Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out in the millennial culture who's gay and who's not, like
oh
this
my gosh,
binary system.
definitely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was so, as a teenager, especially, I was so paranoid over like my purchases and, like, oh God, I've got to make sure, like, is this jacket I'm wearing, is that a bit too gay? Like, are people gonna know? And but also it's funny because I wasn't like Danny, my main character, as a teenager who was very, very shy. Like I was, as far as anyone knew, the only gay person in the entire vicinity. And I was very like it's on the outside, I'm sure I appeared very, very confident and like knew who I was, but it was, in some ways, it was kind of a mask for that insecurity inside, where I was like deeply paranoid and would worry, like lie in bed at night and worry about, like, had I said something that was like a bit too gay, or like,
Mm.
and even now when I like hear recordings of my voice, I'm still quite judgmental on it, where like, which I really wish I wish I was more evolved, but that's still like lingers there.
Yeah.
um
I mean, it's interesting because with Danny, right? He is late 20s,
yeah.
right? Okay. So and I feel like I'm already good friend, like I've known you for a while, Henry. I'm like, how much am I going to personally reveal about myself? I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I've
We have,
revealed a lot about myself in that book, so you go for it.
well, again though, there's a lot of juicy, steamy details and sexual
Mm.
details in First Time for Everything, but we'll have to see like how much of that's based on Henry's life and how much of it isn't. But before we get into that, I think it's important that you open up about right now your experience coming out. And so you were out in high school, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I came out when I was maybe about 12 or 13 to all of my
Oh,
friends.
okay.
But it's kind of funny because I went to a private Catholic girls' school where it was the first year it went co-ed, so there was 6 boys and 300 girls, and I got a
Wow.
scholarship into this school.
Yeah. That's a very
um,
unique perspective.
yeah, so I think in some ways I was quite fortunate in that I was still bullied, and I was, because I grew up in a very small town as well. It was very conservative and very homophobic, but I feel like I probably had a better experience at school than some people, and I think that probably allowed me to come out earlier than I would have done. Because I mean, it's so usual for people to come out of university, isn't it? When they like move away from home and
Hmm.
they feel like they can be, they're safer to be
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. And their
Um,
town isn't speculating about things, right? Especially
yeah,
if
and they're
you're
not
from a
with the
small
people they've known
town.
their whole life. Yeah, they're not with their
Yeah.
family.
Yeah,
Um,
like how many people are in your community, in your town that you grew up in?
So I grew up
About.
in a tiny, tiny village where there was less than 1,000 people, and my
Wow.
family had lived there for 300 years. And
Wow.
we'd
Oh,
run
okay.
the butcher shop in the village for 100 years. And I, as a
Oh.
gay vegetarian teenager, worked in the butcher shop.
Oh, wow.
Like,
But this is like a
along,
long generational family business.
yeah, I think it was, maybe I was like the fifth generation to work there. Yeah,
Oh, wow. Of the Fry family, I'm
of the Fry
assuming.
family, yes.
Yeah. I mean, when I hear Fry, I do think, isn't there Charles Fry or isn't
Stephen
there a
Fry.
writer or Stephen Fry, not Charles. I don't know where I got
Yeah.
Charles Fry, but Stephen Fry. Okay.
Yeah.
Any relation?
No relation, but in
Oh,
school, people loved to say that we were related.
uh, oh my. But wow, so less than 1,000. Yeah, see, my town in New Jersey, I grew up with 50,000
Mm.
in the town. And then I was only 20 minutes from Philadelphia. So like a very different, more of that, like if you lived on the outskirts of London,
Oh, right. Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
suburban communities.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so like I wasn't the only, and there was almost 800 in my high school class. So I was not the only out person. I mean, I would say there was more out those who identify as women. There were more women who were identifying as bisexual or lesbian. Um, there were a few of us who were gay men, but I feel like it actually, in my case, it felt more of a competitive element if you were out, that you were being judged by the straight community about like who is going to be the accessory to the straight
Mm.
girls, like who is the gay man who's
Yeah,
going to
the
be
GBF.
chosen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they're like, well, so and so looks like this, why don't you look like that, like
Yeah, and
more
like, are you guys gonna
yeah.
go out when you like have
Oh,
nothing
all the
in common
time.
at all?
All the time. I mean, we did have a great what they call here gay and lesbian uh what did they call it?
Or well, like society
Thank you. Yes, yes.
thing. Yeah, that's cool.
It'll come to me. But yes, like the allyship, but also LGBTQ club community. Gay Straight Alliance. There we go.
Okay.
And I'm having some coffee. It's the morning for everyone out there.
Okay.
But my thoughts are still trying to come to me. And what I love though is like we had a mixer with other high schools. So like I didn't know a lot of LGBTQ people. I would say there wasn't a lot of like open transgender students, or at least
Mhm.
I wasn't as aware. I feel like that definitely has made progress with
Oh
openness
yeah,
in
for
high
sure.
schools. Um, but yeah, all of that is to say, I find in your novel, it's so authentic the way that you go back and forth with Danny and the straight friends and his workplace community, like that all of these dynamics exist. And it seems like you must have so much psychological knowledge of straight and gay relationships.
Well, I've been to a lot of therapy, so
Oh. And now a message from the Gay and Lesbian Review.
Hello, listeners. This is Stephen Hemrick, the publisher of the GNLR, here with a special offer just for you. For those of you who aren't familiar with the GNLR, let me provide a little background. The GLR is a bi-monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics that publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies, and a number of special features such as artists' profiles and the popular art memo column. Each issue brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought-provoking articles focused on a unifying theme and brings together the leading minds on the topic. You won't find a lot about the latest dating fads or fashion trends, though you might find articles about online dating as a social phenomenon or the gay influence on 20th century fashion. For example, the theme of the current issue is Queens and Kings, and it features an article by Andrew Holleran about Truman Capote's relationships with glamorous women, the women he called his swans. Now for the special offer. When you subscribe, you'll receive a free copy with any print or digital subscription. That's 7 issues instead of 6. Visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Click subscribe and enter promo code ITBR for your free issue. And as an added bonus, you'll receive online access to all archived issues of the magazine.
Did you rely on like any, because I noticed, I think this is in every book, but I especially noticed when I opened your book, I just, for everyone out there, I think it's something that a publisher has to do, but you can correct this narrative. But it says all the characters in this book are fictitious, and any resemblance to actual persons living or dead is purely coincidental. And I found that that's, for some reason, I know it's in almost every novel, but it stuck out to me. I'm like, wait, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
that's a legal thing you have to have in every novel. I mean, which
just
is
in
kind of
case.
ridiculous because I do cite a lot of like celebrities and stuff in the novel who are clearly real. But there we go.
That's true. I mean,
Yeah.
but I do love Henry starts off with this quote: "For everyone else who's late to the party, let's make up for lost time."
Yeah.
And, can you expand upon that? Like, what are you getting to there as this opener for your novel?
Yeah. So, I started writing this book when I was, I think, about 31 or 32, I think. And I wrote it very quickly in the first draft in 3 weeks when I was between jobs. So like super
Wow.
fast, it was very like janky and unfinished, but I had the rough story down. And the kind of genesis really came from something I felt like I experienced in my late 20s and I saw with lots of my queer friends as well, which was while we had come out earlier in life, we sort of had this almost second coming out later when we'd kind of you'd gone through the period where you were pretending to be straight and hiding who you were. Then you came out and you were like, I'm gay, I'm in gay culture. I'm gonna be like Yas Queen and be all like, what does it mean to be gay? Who am I as a gay person now? But that in some ways you're almost like you can adopt a bit of another persona. And then
Mm.
I felt like this sort of second coming out was when people really combined the two into their most authentic version of themselves, where they sit comfortably between these divergent identities and within these different elements of their life. So between their family and their friends and their queer culture and straight culture. So yeah, I just really felt like that I'd not really read about that before, and it felt like such a noticeable trend within so many of the queer people I know, and I know so many other people that have actually come out just for the first time in their in their early 30s now, and it's really wild, you know, like I think you can really feel as a queer person that you maybe didn't get your teenage years the same way that straight people did, and maybe you have that in your 20s a lot of the time, especially if, like me, you've come from a very, very small community. So I just really wanted to explore that.
Yeah. And there's so much to unpack in, like, even though I have to say, I felt very seen. I felt like I could embrace being gay in high school, but still there's, you know, when you're trying to live your authentic truth, there's going to be some who try to bring you down, especially at that young age when you're more susceptible to the external influence of how are they judging me, or even peer pressure that just exists already in high school.
Yeah, because you're
And
always trying to fit in, aren't you, in high school, like in whatever way that is kind of applicable for you, in whatever way is safe, in whichever way is like deemed socially acceptable. So you can't, I mean, this is something I wanted to do with the straight characters as well. So like Danny's housemate at the start of the novel, Laura, she's in this kind of relationship with her kind of childhood sweetheart, who really doesn't seem very bothered about her or the fact that they're going to have a baby. And I wanted to explore how she was almost playing this role of like what she thought of as like a contemporary femininity, but still quite a conservative femininity, in the same way that Danny has been like playing a role as like a kind of acceptable gay guy. So they're both, because they've known each other since they were 15 or whatever, younger. They've like remained in that dynamic, while at the same time Jacob, his best friend, who they've been friends since they were 5, they've grown up in this small seaside town together. Jacob is like the absolute antithesis of that, where Jacob is like 150% themselves, like unashamedly queer, like mixed race, non-binary, completely amazing. Like, and I wanted there to be that juxtaposition where Jacob makes Danny feel uncomfortable, but Danny is also jealous of the freedom that he sees Jacob has. But he also makes like Laura and Luke feel uncomfortable because they're clinging on to this perhaps outdated idea of heteronormativity. And Jacob's like flamboyant, like prideful queerness is so opposed to that.
Well, and Jacob's presentation is, like you said, they're non-binary, but they're so openly embracing being flamboyant. Like, again, this is another element of your novel that I love so well, which is it really is all about that unpacking of, what is my truth as a person, and what has society tried to mold me into to tone down my identity, my voice, my suppress aspects of yourself. So I think that kind of leads into, I wanted Henry, if you would do the pleasure of reading the tweet. Henry actually not tweets, but he uses a tweet as an epigraph, which I thought was so ingenious. I'm like, yes, Twitter is now getting its due here. But it's from Alexander Leone. Who is Alexander, Henry?
So he's a British writer, campaigner, LGBT rights, anti-racism and mental health kind of activist. And he wrote this tweet in, I think, maybe early 2020, which was, I'd written the book and I was going through iterations of it, and I just saw this tweet like popping off on Twitter, and I just thought, oh my God, that's like exactly what the heart of the book is about. So when I had got my publishing deal, I messaged him and said, I loved your tweet so much. It was so inspirational to me. I'd love to use it at the start of my book. And he very kindly said that I could use it.
Oh.
So the tweet is this.
Mhm.
Queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us. Which is just like so wise.
It
And it's
really
also
is.
like every character, I would say, in the book is doing some version of that.
Yeah. And they don't have to be queer to be. I mean, I would say
No.
this is just the art of representation of your identity, which is right. Even who's Lara's? I'm sorry, I'm having a blank, but Lara's boyfriend, yet
Luke.
boyfriend, fiance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Luke. He's this kind of like rugby bro,
Yeah.
slightly
Always
homoerotic
watching a
tones.
game.
Yeah,
Like, I don't think I've ever seen him in the novel away from the TV, which
no,
has
he's
been
pretty much
fascinating.
only watching rugby the whole time.
And I'm thinking, wait, does he have a job that requires him to be somewhere? But
Oh
I
yeah, he works as he's a realtor.
okay. Interesting. Um my realtor friend out there, Danielle. I know she's not watching TV all the time, Danielle. But maybe Danielle, you can take Luke under your wing. No,
Yeah.
that's too much baggage. But yeah, so what I love though about Alexander's quote and why I think it's so important that you start with it is what we've been discussing, but just the way he describes that, for queer people, this massive task is unpicking the parts of ourselves that are us and which
Mm,
we've created to protect us is also right a way that a defense mechanism or a
yeah.
shield, like how Danny gets very uncomfortable with how people are responding to Jacob's openness about
Yeah.
Jacob's identity. And like for Danny's more concerned about Jacob being quote unquote flamboyant than Jacob
Yeah.
is, or at least Jacob's not showing it, Danny says. But still, I think it is fascinating because there's friends of mine where they're worried about showing all the aspects of themselves. Like, I will say mostly my queer friends, but like even who still remember being mocked for their voice. Like it's still
Yeah.
in their psyche. Like it takes a lot of time to work through that
It
for,
takes a lot of
yeah.
time. And I feel like the kind of queer stories I grew up with were either like the character, they get like beaten up, or they get kicked out of their home, or they get HIV and they die, or they come out and like everything is great, almost like in straight stories where the couple get married and then it's the end and we assume the rest of their life is amazing forever. I was just like, that's not what happens. There's so much baggage that you have beyond that you need to unpick. And that's sort of what I mean when I talk about this second coming out and about all of the characters like having these defensive personalities one way or another, or personality traits. So like Tobbs, who's Danny's boyfriend at the start of the novel, he would define himself, I say, by the things that he doesn't like. So he's like, oh, that's so heteronormative, but he'd also be like, oh, that's so gay. Like, so he's very like
He's
dismissive of things.
against
Yeah,
against
he's very
things.
against, and I
Yeah.
would say he's probably the most tragic character in the novel because he's so kind of eaten up inside still by all of these things, and he really projects it onto Danny, which makes Danny very anxious. Danny's very anxious for love and affirmation, and thinks he can't get it anywhere else, despite the fact that he's very clearly not going to get it from this guy who he's been with for a year. And Tobbs really doesn't like Danny's relationship with Jacob, his best friend, because I mean, for the same reasons that Danny at points feels uncomfortable with Jacob. They're very, very queer. And also they've got a very close, genuine friendship, and that threatens Tobbs as well. So they're all these queer characters, like working out where they are in their journey for self-acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't want to go down on the have you have to say anything you don't want to say, but because I feel like everything you're describing reminds me of, I wish I remembered the name of the movie, but there is this movie where they were putting on A Midsummer Night's Dream in a British prep school. It was all boys. I clearly, if anyone remembers the movie, I'm sure I could find it quickly, but
Gosh, I know. Yeah.
it'll come to me like as we're talking. But the reason I bring it up is because it was like this musical retelling of gay love, and I found it so authentically, like Danny in a way reminded me of the character in that film, because he's trying to really find his pathway and he knows his voice, but he's also right. Danny's a great protagonist, Henry. Like, you created such an ideal protagonist because he's the one who's involved in so many circles and so
Yeah.
many, has so many obstacles because he's in different worlds. And right, that's a character you really want to follow, especially with his point of view from first person. But I'm just thinking, England has so many, or I remember so many queer films, and especially you had Queer as Folk originally.
Yeah.
You had Billy Elliot, which, right, kind of really shows a lot of the sides of homophobia, but there's also
Yeah.
Billy's
And
best
masculinity.
friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Billy is so open with his best friend. Like, Billy kind of just wants to dance. Like, that becomes his heartbeat. But I guess all of that is getting me to say about the new movie Bros, which I haven't seen yet, but I have seen Fire Island. Um, but have you had a chance to see Bros? Just because I'm curious if you think it reflects your novel's tone or is very takes a completely different detour.
That's very interesting because my boyfriend is a showbiz journalist, and we went to see a screening of Bros last week, ahead of its like UK release, and then we watched Fire Island afterwards.
So it's very different, the
Yeah,
tones.
very different. And it's very interesting. We're definitely in this next era of like queer storytelling for sure. It's very different now. Like, we're starting to like pick at the nuances a lot more. It's not just like we exist and we are human beings that feel just like the rest of you. It's very interesting, like looking at the two films. I feel like they are made for different audiences. Like, I feel like Bros is almost more made for a straight audience that's trying to explain elements of being mostly a queer male, and I feel like a queer white male. And Fire Island is much more, feels like a queer movie made for queer people, like a lot more unapologetically so. So I don't know. I don't know how I felt about Bros. We had a lot of discussions about it. I felt like good and bad about it. I felt like there was in some ways a bit of a lack of self-awareness, because the character played by Billy Eichner, who has written it and stars in it, is so similar to his persona that we already know. I felt like that maybe precluded the chance to go deeper into vulnerability with the character a bit. It felt at some points to me a little bit, it was very much fixated on like body image and like being broy. But for me, that's like the top level of what's underneath. So what are those insecurities like? Like, we don't really go into his relationship with his parents, who are both deceased, or like his, I don't know, his like key experiences like growing up or anything. Like, none of that is really touched on, and I thought that was a bit strange when you're almost missing out a bit of the story. I mean, it's a rom-com. The point is that it's like the first gay rom-com like made by a big studio. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad it's there, but I think it tells maybe one element of a bit of a story, but I felt like it could have been a bit richer, and he could have maybe included more of the other LGBT characters a bit more, because it was very focused on a bit on this one experience. But But generally, I think it's amazing that something like that exists. I kind of can't believe that we live in an age where there are these things like that now. So
Yeah, well, and like you said, it's the first mainstream rom-com produced by um a Hollywood studio
yeah.
in that way. But that's where I look to streaming services, where we have so much now LGBTQ
Oh my gosh,
storytelling.
amazing.
You know,
Yeah.
like where, yes, I mean, my whole feeling is it's wonderful that happened with Bros, but at the same time, it's not like that's the only representation out there. There's so much. Like,
There is
but
so
again,
much.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, but I do have to say, even though I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to comment, I don't know the narrative that well. I will say, like, even from all the marketing, because I was following I follow him on TikTok.
Yeah.
I have to say that, like, publicity was really intense. Like, all the interviews, like, there was so much interviews happening. And I can understand they're kind of caught in two worlds because the director's Judd Apatow, and we all think Judd Apatow has like more of that raunchy straight comedy.
Yeah, more like
Like,
bro humor, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Well,
Yeah.
because I think there was didn't Judd Apatow do what was one of the films? I
Isn't it
think
like The Hangover? Was it The
yeah, The
Hangover?
Hangover, Trainwreck with Amy Schumer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was maybe Knocked Up. I think that's Judd Apatow.
Yeah, Year-Old Virgin,
Okay.
that kind of thing. Yeah, Trainwreck, super bad. Anchorman, Forgetting Sarah
Okay.
Marshall.
Yeah,
It's a
so
very
like,
like distinct genre of of
yeah,
comedy movie.
this is the first one that's focused on any queer representation with Judd Apatow, or at least in those films, I don't really remember queer characters.
Mm.
So I think it was kind of we're being torn. Like, this is the first gay rom-com done by a Hollywood-backed studio, but then at the other time, they're trying to appeal to straight audiences to come to the movie, and I don't know. I think either way, there's going to be critiques, but I think
Yeah,
what you
for
said is
sure.
wonderful, is at least this film exists. And my
Yeah.
feeling too is, with box office numbers right now, people are just not really going to the movies in mass. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. Like, I don't know if that's really about Bros, because I know, again,
Yeah,
I
because
told you we
Billy
wouldn't
was
go down
saying
the.
queer people aren't turning out to support the movie.
And that's
But
what
it's
Billy
like,
said, and I don't really believe it, actually. I
I
think
don't, I
that,
think to me that sounds
yeah.
like he's bitter that it that it hasn't
Yeah, I
done
was
as well
like,
as he
this is
hoped
a
it
hot
would be.
take, Billy. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa.
Do you have a queer fascination with classic films? Ever wish you'd be transported back to that golden age of cinema as if you're in the movies themselves? Hi, my name is Christian Garcia, and I am the host of That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Join my friends and I as we travel back in time to that classic age of film and peel back the layers of how these films transformed our view behind the camera and into the lens of cinema. Make sure to follow my Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema, and I'll be sure to save you a seat at our next showing. See you there.
I mean, because I saw Don't Worry, Darling, and there was like maybe 15 of us. Like,
Yeah.
if that. I just think if it's not a big superhero movie and people are not thinking, oh, I need to see it in the theater, which I think is a wrong impression, because movies are so enjoyable in the cinema with the screen and the experience. But again, I think we've become so used to streaming that.
Yeah, I mean, in the pandemic's happened,
Yeah.
we've got so used to watching stuff on Netflix, and movies are also so quickly then on streamers anyway, once they have a theater
That's
release
true.
as well. So you could wait a couple of weeks and probably watch it at home.
That's
But,
true.
like, the
Well,
streamers,
yeah.
I mean, there's been so many amazing LGBT things on streaming. Like, I don't know, have you seen Heartstopper?
No.
Oh gosh,
Heartstopper. What streaming service is this on?
it's on Netflix. It's like it came
Oh,
out
okay.
maybe a couple of months ago. It's this just absolutely the cutest thing ever. This like British, it's based on a series of graphic novels by Alice
Ooh.
Oseman, called Heartstopper, and it's basically about these two boys. I think they're like 15-year-old boys in high school that fall in love, and then their other kind of LGBT friends. And it is honestly just the cutest thing I've ever seen. And it's kind of not very dramatic. The stakes are quite low. It's kind of just about them finding out who they are and falling in love. And it's just so adorable. And I'm so happy that we live in this age where there are these very like charming, sweet, everyday stories as well. But as well as other things, like I don't know, did you see It's a Sin?
No, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen Uncoupled, which I know
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I
Uncoupled
haven't
is a
watched that either.
comedy.
Yeah.
But I did see all of Pose. I think Pose was
Oh,
probably
yeah.
one of the best shows that's been done recently. I've seen Euphoria.
Yeah.
That's a trip.
That is a trip, literally.
It is. Yeah, I thought it though really well executed as a series. But no, so okay, you have so many now I have to add to my list. But like, was your, because first time for everything, I don't want it to seem like, this is a pastiche novel, because everyone out there, this isn't pastiche. Like, it's not like Henry's taking narratives and throwing them in the novel, but you create such a unique perspective that I could see play in a TV show, or, I could see, like, this is almost to me a more adult oriented Love, Simon. Like, because I remember when Love, Simon right came, I think was from a book, or was adapted from a
it
book.
was a book called Simon versus the Homo sapien Agenda.
So and I feel like all of the elements, like, because I don't want to give away all the like all the cards falling in the novel, because this is why everyone has to pick up your novel. They need to listen or pick it up. And also, do you remember who your performer is in your audiobook?
We have two different ones. In the American version, it's Will Watt, who does a really great job. And in the UK, it's George Hayworth. He's really good as well. They both did such a good job.
And they both have British accents, right?
Yeah, they're both British.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and if we can we get into the Devil Wears Prada, a la Devil Wears Prada type scene that happens in Danny's workplace? I don't know why I kept thinking of Devil Wears Prada with this like cafeteria scene that you paint so well.
When his friend Jacob comes to visit, and he's absolutely mortified. Yeah.
And it's like, I think just because Jacob doesn't is so at odds with this hipster business that's like a startup business, and the boss is wearing a bedazzled hat, but he's like a straight bro. And he like, the boss uses slurs with Danny but thinks it's affectionate. It's just, there's a lot happening with that boss. But at the same time keeps everyone, like all the men, want Danny to comment on their asses. They're like, my pants look good in this?
Yeah.
But it is interesting, like those dynamics. I think and that's where with a lot of TV or film, I feel that there's not that interplay between gay men, queer women, non-binary people, transgender people with the straight community. Like, I feel like there's not always those intersections. And that's why with Bros, I'm curious to see what happens with straight people. Like, is there a lot of straight people in Bros?
Well, all the cast members are actually queer, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't is there much interplay with straight people? Kind of. It's mostly queer people. And yeah, I mean, in my novel, I wanted to show a wide array of queer people, just because my experience as well living in London, there's every kind of person you could imagine, and the queer scene is very very, very mixed, but very separate.
Well, yeah. Can you explain, like, because he's working in East End London, right? Which I've always
he's working in Oxford Circus, which is right in the middle. But he starts off living in Brixton, which is southeast London, which used to be it was a very like Afro-Caribbean Jamaican area. from the 70s onwards. And then in the last 10 years or so, it's been gentrified and has become a lot whiter. And this is the sort of place I imagined that his housemates, Luke and Laura, would now live. Somewhere where they never would have lived 10 years earlier.
Yeah, it was exactly the way it plays out in like queer scenes in Brooklyn. Like I felt like I was like with Brooklyn hipsters. Like it has, and I think London, yeah, that makes sense. Southeast, or even I have friends who are like really into the artsy scene of East. East End? But see, like with London, I really only know the gay or queer scene in Soho and like Bloomsbury, or like more of, which I think is a different, like that's the more, I guess, intellectual. I don't know. I don't want to make generalizations, but you know, it's they're not hipsters. I'll put it that way. In like there aren't many hipsters I found in Soho or
no, I would say like the kind of queer scene in London is you have Soho is like the traditional center of it, which is now much more media people, and there are like queer spaces, but it's probably more of an older crowd, I would say now. It's not what it used to be, like maybe in like the 70s, 80s, 90s. You have like the Clapham queer scene, which is maybe like the West Hollywood equivalent. So kind of Carly Rae Jepsen, muscle bro vibes. I'm being very judgmental and sweeping statements. And then you have like the East London scene, which is a lot more like gender bending, like green mohawk, nose piercing, Bushwick.
Yeah, exactly. Where like Greenwich
where
Village.
Danny moves into that as someone who is very, very square and moves into this like very wild queer performance art scene.
Yeah, like I feel like he's not at home. He's definitely it seems like he's a little more preppy. And
yeah, he is. He's from a kind of working class background, rural background. So he's but he is quite conservative and he's quite preppy at the same time. So he sits at odds basically with every element of his life. Like there's nowhere he really fully belongs. Like he doesn't feel like he sort of belongs with his like media hipster work colleagues. He doesn't belong with his like posh friends that live in Brixton. He doesn't belong with these like crazy queers in East London, but he learns about himself and them by being with them, and at points becomes very dislikable as he basically discovers like queer activism and goes a bit too far with it.
yeah, well, and that's something everyone can look forward to, is just how Danny's journey with activism, Danny's journey with just questioning how much he wants to get involved in LGBTQ culture. Like you're right. Like we've seen it. You can be an openly, especially with white gay men. Like you can be a white gay man, but that does not mean you're involved in politics and activism for LGBTQ culture.
Like, no, you can kind of scoot by it still as a white man.
Yeah, and I would say for a while that was our narratives in TV film, was like, you know, how much I love Queer as Folk. Like, I mean, I know the American version, but I love it so much. But again, it wasn't what I would say is progressive TV. I would say it's more like, here are white gay men, they're having sex, and they're now showing their lives and narratives, which I think is wonderful for what it did in that time. Because
I mean, it was progressive at the time.
Yeah.
But now, of course, we look at it and thankfully culture has moved on and opened up. And we're seeing lots of different stories that we didn't see in popular culture 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and as we wrap up, which this like flew by, Henry, I want to share with you an anecdote just because I feel like it helps hopefully sells more of your novels. No, because I'm going to be so scandalous.
Well, that's great. I love that.
Yeah. But like, even because I'm so into my gym culture, I find it is enjoyable for me. And maybe this is my own, something I'll have to dissect with a therapist. but like when straight men are talking about like how they're going to hit on women, or I don't know, whatever happens in their locker room conversations. There was one who was like making a really raunchy joke about like having a woman sit on his face, which we don't have to go too in depth with that. But I was like, well, I'm glad you embrace your desire and erotic, or I forget how I phrased it. Something like, I'm so glad you embrace your sexual desire. And I was like, well, hopefully you find a woman who enjoys that openness. And he's like, oh, see, that's why it's so good for you to be a gay man. If only God had made me a gay man, I could just enjoy these open erotic discussions. I was like, okay. Like, that's some progress, I guess.
I feel like I have like I always end up having conversations like that with straight guys, because I feel like they are like, I can have this kind of slightly, I can talk about this stuff that I wouldn't talk about with a woman, or maybe with my guy mates, because you're sort of this slightly in between area. And also maybe he perceives that like I've had sex with 500 people, so he can be like, you gay guys, you're all at it. I can say anything to you because you've done it all.
Yeah. Well, and I have to admit, I did play into his joke, and I think I need to be upfront with the audience here, which is I said, if a man said that to me, I would be applauding. I'd be like, oh, great. Or I think I said something like, oh, if a man sits on your face in the gay community, that usually is acceptable behavior. I don't know. I'm pretty good at
hello.
Yeah, I was like, that's just yeah. That's just a hi. I mean, remember Joan Rivers had this great joke where she was like, any gay man who gets to suck a cock should be excited to be called a cocksucker. And I was just like, but see, with Joan Rivers, yeah, I was like, Joan Rivers, okay, she can get away with that. But again, right? Not all queer people are sexually charged like that, right? But I think you show us a way in your novel that there can be a lot of nuance with straight men and queer men. And I think a lot of the times, like even with my encounters, I love those conversations that I have with men because, like you're saying, there's almost this comfortability they have joking with you or opening up that they don't have in other spaces. And my feeling is, well, that's good. Like there is a way to connect more of the communities.
Oh my gosh, definitely. Yeah. I have wonderful, such intimate, close friendships with so many of my straight male friends, which I just really cherish for that reason.
Well, Henry, I guess I left us on a really erotic note. Everyone's like, how did we get from first time for everything to sitting on a face and Joan Rivers blowjob? Really? I mean, well, I think it actually, everyone, I have to be fair. Henry's language is pretty erotic, pretty sexually open, and there is so much exciting dynamics you explore with the queer community. Everyone, please get your hands on First Time for Everything. If you are in Canada or the UK, you get this lovely phallic cover. And if you're in America, you get more of the disco psychedelic cover, which I think both are equally queer and pulsating. And also the audiobooks are wonderful. So yeah, however you want to consume Henry Fry's novel, you're going to be happy. Oh, and shout out to Celia Lasky, who's a friend of our show, for the quote about hanging with one of your queer besties, because I definitely feel so comfortable just being within your novel, Henry. It is so cozy. It is so needed right now. And I hope there's something in the future with First Time for Everything. I hope something happens in the, film God world.
Well, I can't say too much, but maybe there will be.
Ooh. Another tease. Okay. Yeah. Another teaser to leave us on. Just like your cover teasing us. Okay. I see what's happening here, Henry. Well, thank you so much. This was so enjoyable. And yeah, I opened up about things I didn't know I was going to talk about, but guess what? That means you're very good at introspective discussion. So if I ever see a Joan Rivers joke land in one of your books, I'll know. Oh,
Where it came from.
I know where it came from now. Okay. Thank you so much, Henry. And, everyone out there, I hope, you're laughing as much as we are here. Okay. Bye, Henry.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Andrew. Bye.
Hi, Ivory Tower Boiler Room audience. It is Andrew Rimby, the director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Welcome to our winter season. And are you trying to stay warm this season? Well, guess what? We have the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Cafe. It is our Patreon where there is so much bonus content. So I'll go over all that. But first, it's only $5, which is less than a latte, a cappuccino, a coffee, a tea, basically anything now because, we have some inflation going on. So join us on our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. What do you get? You get Gregory Maguire giving us all the scoop on the Wicked movie musical. You get Jesse Green giving us his hot takes on the Broadway musical. If you don't know who Jesse is, well, you should, because he's the chief theater critic of the New York Times. You get all the JFK and Marilyn Monroe scoop from Elizabeth Winder, a Marilyn Monroe biographer. So much more. You get all our video interviews. You can see everything, including the bonus content. And Mary's going to tell you from True Crime and Academia what you get later. But if you're not following us on social media and seeing our video teasers, well, you need that to stay, nice and energized on these winter days. So follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Ivory Tower Boiler Room. While it's still here, why don't you follow us on Twitter at Ivory Boiler Room? And here's my chief contributor, Mary.
Hey, True Crime friends and Ivory Tower Boiler Room friends. Like Andrew said, you're going to get access to all of this bonus content. That includes True Crime and Academia. So not only will you have access to the bonus episode each month, you will also have video access to the interviews that I conduct on my podcast once a month. You get all of that extra content at your fingertips whenever you feel like watching it, literally for a cup of coffee. So why don't you just buy us one? That'd be so nice. We would appreciate that because we love your support already, but we could use a little bit more if you don't mind.
Yes, we could. And also, hey, do you all know you can actually DM us questions at our social media channels? Yes. Also, why don't you ask us questions with our social media posts? We love it. We even shout out questions on our episodes. And if you want, you can always email us at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com to actually order our merchandise. So we have hats, we have t-shirts, we have posters, we have everything. If you want any merchandise with the Ivory Tower Boiler Room logo, we're going to make it happen for you. Okay, on that note, happy winter season, everyone.
Happy winter.